Welcome to this online event organized by us. A wonderful opportunity to see the presentation video that listed all goals percent Agenda 2030. These goals, as you know, not be achieved by 2030, as right? Said over and over again. We're lagging behind. The objectives seem to be quite far ahead of us. However, the idea of achieving them is very important. And that is why today's event is essential. Today we have Rome and New York, a city that today is part of everybody's attention. The headquarters, headquarters, and this is where the attention of the whole world seems to be focused on these days. And many seem to try and attack UN. So today's event is important, and even if we were able to achieve at least one of these goals, we might be able to then do our best to achieve the others as well. So that was all I had to say. I think that the scientific director of ASviS will have to take the floor now. I believe that we should overcome the obstacles, use our hearts and minds. I think it's time I gave thought to Professor. I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's a former minister and famous economist. This is his personal fight. This is what he's been working for years. This is what he wants to do. He wants our country and everybody else to follow this road. Good afternoon or good morning for those of you who are right now in New York. This event has been jointly organized by the Italian representatives at the UN together with Global Compact Network Italy that represents the Italian enterprises that are committing towards a more and more sustainable development together with the social network Italia. That was created a few years ago to focus on the achievement of Agenda 2030 goals. So we know that the alternative to a sustainable world is an unsustainable world, but we are headstrong because we believe that we, together with over 300 organizations that work with us, the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development, we know that amongst them there are so many subjects, actors, administrators, public and private actors that work together on a daily basis for the achievement of these goals. And despite existing difficulties, despite what we read and we hear in TVs, newspapers, there's a major support to Agenda 2030 provided today, by different actors. So saying that nobody cares is wrong, and the UN as such keeps fighting, keeps working thanks to its many and varied agencies. And if with the magic wand the UN were to disappear, the world would fare pretty badly. And if 85% of the European citizens in fact acknowledge the importance of Agenda 2030 is important, it's essential, and if those very same citizens expect governments to do more, if in Italy a large percentage of people, of the Italians, believe that we should achieve sustainability-related binding objectives, it means that the process that started a couple of decades ago is still there, it's still going on, it's still fighting against strong winds, despite the errors that, of course, were made, because the idea of making the world, turning the world into a sustainable system is essential, and is something that we can't forego. That is why it is so important today that we talk about these subjects. I'd like to thank ANSA and RAI for Sustainability, the Italian National TV network, that will broadcast this event live on their channels. Online channels. ASviS was set up in February 2016 to ensure the implementation of Agenda 2030. And in fact, this is an important anniversary, 10th anniversary, important to launch once again our commitment towards sustainability. And today, new ASviS initiative, it's called Ecosystem for the Future, has just published its first futures paper, i.e. An analysis essential to ensure that all world countries, including Italy, will comply with the commitments included in that agreement signed last year in order to anticipate and avoid risks, to exploit opportunities and work for a sustainable future. Let me remind you once again that Agenda 2030 is not a merely environmental issue. Of course, it is environmental as such, but talking about what was published yesterday on the planet limits shows that the world is slowly achieving its own limits. We are going to pay the price for the disasters that we are causing. But Agenda 2030 goes well beyond the environmental issues. It pertains justice, the fight against inequalities, with governance, with peace. So when anyone says, well, yes, okay, but what would you say about peacekeeping? Well, that is, of course, the priority right now. Some people might argue that this goal can be achieved by increasing military expenditure. But the point is, in fact, our main objective is peace, governments, and goal 17 is in fact focused on partnership, the partnership that some countries, even very important large countries, are regularly doing their best to gradually destroy. So we must reinforce our commitment. We must focus again. We can't be just dreamers. We must be practical in our approach, in our vision. That is why today's event will help us understand what we can do better at a global world, at a local, at a national world. A year ago, as I said a little while ago, right, there were a few technical difficulties that seem to have been tackled and solved. Yes, it seems we can start again. In fact, says the speaker, we must go ahead. Right, so back to the agreement on the future. This envisages a major commitment of all countries, including, of course, a commitment to be able to have so-called anticipatory governance, i.e. the fact that we must come up with institutions and rules and regulations to make sure that any decision we make today be beneficial to future generations and not just the current generation, future generations. That is exactly what Article 9 of our Constitution says and envisages. From also thanks to the changes promoted by ASviS, Article 9 says that our republic must protect the environment, ecosystems and biodiversity in the interest of future generations too. So the word, quote unquote, future has become part of our constitution. So the interest in working in the interest of future generations is important. We talk about justice as well. And we look at the future. We're glad that our national parliament is in fact involved in a debate on a specific bill, and the ASviS also gave its contribution, a bill about the analysis of intergenerational impact of the impact of current rules and regulations on justice and equal opportunities for future generations. Talk about an intergeneration kind of attitude and involvement, and provided that the Parliament approves this bill, ASviS in the meantime has involved a number of experts to define and envisage indicators, key indicators, methods. That is exactly what the European Commission is currently doing. In fact, one of the new commissioners of the new von der Leyen Commission is in fact working on justice, on the issue of justice between the generations, current and future generations. And I'd like to conclude something that is linked to our today's topics. We all know about fake news, saying that climate change and climate issues, in fact, are fake news. This is ridiculous. It's no surprise, of course, to us. We know that Trump himself, the president of the United States, says things like that. And very often we hear about attempts to turn this issue into something useless. So this contradiction between competitiveness, production, well-being of workers, sustainability, saying that there's no link between these issues, climate change, etc., is absurd if we consider the ASviS spring report. Well, in the report, ASviS says that Italian companies that chose in favor of sustainability have in fact increased their sales. We talk about a two-figure kind of increase, and vis-a-vis those companies that have not chosen sustainability amongst their objectives. And a survey that was carried out by We World together with ASviS and Impresa Enterprise 2030, the survey shows that the Italian population wants for companies to work towards sustainability, and they expect even non-European companies whose products are in fact manufactured in the EU must comply with respect for human rights, respect for the environment. There has to be their compliance vis-a-vis these objectives. There can't be a competitive issue and a competitive problem because our companies comply with these objectives and non-European companies working in Europe don't. So we must focus towards a different kind of capitalism that takes into account the interest of people, of workers, let's consider accidents at work and all the relevant issues. So these are the major challenges that lay ahead of us. The European Union are reconsidering the legislation, possible changes within the legislative framework. However, there are lobbying activities, there are different interests at stake. So right now, in these days and months, there's a debate going on, focusing on where we want to head to, what we want to go, where we want to go. So that was in short to say, and I can't wait to listen to all those that will be able to take part in today's meeting. Thank you very much for being here. Yes, Professor, thank you very much for being here. You have highlighted the situation, the objectives, and as Giovannini said, yesterday, these very same objectives have been questioned by Mr. Trump himself, who decided to do his best during his 28-minute speech to launch extremely serious accusations towards the UN. But I have a survey here in front of me, a survey carried out in the European Union, a survey whose results seem to be quite comforting, because out of the survey, it's 85% of citizens trust us, and they know and they expect that these objectives, goals, and targets and milestones will in fact improve their own lives. They remove existing social inequalities, which are at the root of many of our social issues. This survey also states that citizens expect answers by our politicians. And in fact, we all have listened to what heads of governments and states say at the UN headquarters, and sometimes these interventions seem to be contradictory one with the other. But what matters is that within the UN, everybody has a right to speech. There's free speech, right to free speech, and this in itself is a very important value that we must protect, because it is under siege. So we hope we don't go back to a new medieval kind of attitudes. We don't want to go back to the Middle Ages. So I'd like to give the floor to our ambassador, permanent ambassador at the UN headquarters. So I'd like to listen to what he says, considering that New York right now is at the heart of everything that we attach importance to. Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. You have the floor.
Buongiorno.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me to part in this and to do agree of the arguments that pending after the launch of the 2030 agenda is certainly very important. At the same time, there are implications, and of course, I refer to the present geopolitical picture. We talk about the recession, seen from the very of this administration rejection part of the US concerning the entire language and content of the agenda. The US is stepping back from the agenda. This is an issue in that the United States has been the main partner and supporter of the UN. Moreover, there have been drastic cuts to the operations of the UN, voluntary contributions, and those cuts will also affect the ability of Global South countries to realize, to fulfill SDGs. So this is the problem, this is an issue, we can't overlook it. These days I'm moving from one meeting to another, so I had the opportunity to listen to several Western countries. My feeling is that the political commitment toward the 2030 agenda and the pact for the future in the West, US aside, has become a bit ambivalent. There are divisions in the West concerning this priority, one of the very foundations of the UN agenda. Speeches by Western leaders have spoken about the 2030 agenda of the Pact for the Future quite rarely. So the ownership of the agenda on the part of Western countries seems to decline, to be declining. The 2030 agenda according to the US is covered by an ideology which somehow restricts national sovereignty, and this should be fixed. As you know, the real ambition of the 2030 agenda is a soft law instrument, nothing binding in legal terms. 2030 agenda is a roadmap for governments and states in their national development path. So I believe that this is compatible with the sovereignty of states and their decisions and their national decisions. So the American position is a real issue, also in terms of resources allocated to the implementation of the agenda. And I guess that also the West is showing some perplexity. SDGs implementation. Well, we are not really happy. Only 35% of targets are in line with the final achievement. We have 169 specific targets and then SDGs. 40% of them is proceeding too slowly, and 18% of targets is going back relative to 2015. And there is also a financial issue. how to fund the implementation of SDGs, aside from the cuts to American voluntary contributions. There is a different policy on the part of the US, also relative to the World Bank. America now would like to fund only projects that promote the use of fossil fuels. And several chiefs of state and government have talked about the financial gap, which is worth 1.5 to 3 trillion a year in terms of funds allocated to sustainable development. So I really don't understand what will happen. During the Seville conference of July, we have seen, important statements, but again, the US didn't take part. So we have a problem in terms of financing. Positions are very distant among countries. The global south and also the west, within the west, G7 countries are expressing very different positions. So the financial needs, the financial requirements that are certainly needed to implement SDGs, we don't know where they come from. So this is a question mark. Are they still feasible? $4 trillion a year. This is the amount of money that is needed. May I end, as Professor Giovannini said, by recalling that the Sustainable Development Agenda, the 2030 Agenda, not only covers the environment, it is a broad-ranging agenda. I guess we also may have a problem in terms of communication. The 2030 Agenda has sometimes is seen as an ideology. It isn't. These are issues and problems that have to do with the stabilization of the planet. And this covers everything from education to healthcare to food safety and security, justice, partnerships. There is a bit of everything in the agenda. And aside from the agenda, those problems are there, and they can only be solved through cooperation among states. So this is what the UN is proposing. And there is no imposition at all, because the UN is a supranational organization, and so they can't impose anything. They use the expression soft law. This is not the European Commission. These commitments were signed by governments in 2015. The Pact for the Future, mentioned several times today, has been signed and accepted by all governments last year. So this is also important. Do governments identify themselves with the goals of this pact for the future? Why did they sign the pact? I think that what it takes is a review in the West, including in Europe, to truly understand the real commitment and sense of ownership of the 2030 agenda and pact for the future, aside from the American position. That, of course, is very important, given the role that the US has been playing to this date within the UN. Thank you. Thank you very much for bringing us back to the real world by recalling what is going on in New York. We have seen that the American policy is dramatically changing. Indeed, those goals were undersigned 10 years ago. But now some governments are stepping back, and those governments, of course, can decide about the future of the planet. I'm not only talking about the United States, even some European countries, some European governments are criticizing the agenda as President Trump did, which of course in itself slows down the progress of such goals. Some SDGs have been ridiculed. This is about the life of people, healthcare, education, agriculture. This is about real life. When we say peace, we mean life. And right now, how important the word peace is. It is essential. That's why it is so important to achieve these goals and try and get a world characterized by fewer inequalities and more participation. The primary goal, I think, is this one. And now I'd like to give the floor to Professor Phoebe Koundouri, President of the of Economy and Business. She has been involved in several initiatives on the environment, finance, sustainable finance, climate policy, and these are keys to achieve those objectives. The floor to you.
Thank you very much to my colleague and respected friend, Professor Enrico Giovannini, for inviting me in these very important events about the 10 years of the 2030 agenda. Indeed, it is important to know what progress did we make and what we can expect. I don't know if you can share my slides. If you can share them, it will be good. Now, what is important to convey today is that I've been assigned by the General Secretary of the UN to chair the Global Sustainable Development Report. I am speaking from New York at the UN General Assembly and New York Climate Week, and I can convey the spirit, the general thinking about where we are on the SDGs, what are the challenges and what are the opportunities. Throughout my life, I've been working on pioneering interdisciplinary systems between nature, economy, and society. And the aim has always been to reach sustainability, to get every country of the world on a sustainable pathway, which means a pathway that can support the welfare of the people today, in the future, and of future generations. This is what sustainability means. The way we manage our nature, our economy and society, so that it can serve us better. And in that, it is important to understand that serving us better means that we also serve better the sustainability of the environment and the cohesion of the society, together with the efficiency of the economy. Next slide, please. So in 2015, we have agreed to try to escape our multi-crisis, the low economic growth rate, the increasing population, the increasing inequalities, the biodiversity crisis, the climate crisis, through a very nicely laid out, very science-based framework that we call the SDGs, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, a very integrated systems thinking framework to allow us to get away from our crisis to a sustainable future for our own welfare, the current generation, but also the future generation. Next slide, please. And this is exactly what we are trying to assess in the Global Sustainability Report. This Global Sustainable Development Report that I have been the honor to be assigned as the co-chair for writing with a group of 15 eminent scientists is making clear two things. First, where do we stand with regards to our performance? Second, where do we want to go after 2030? Is the last report before the deadline of 2030? And the question is, do we continue with the SDGs? Do we revise? Do we forget about them and introduce something new? Let's see. Next slide, please. So throughout the history of the SDGs, we have this report.
Vorrei chiamare, se fosse possibile, Mariarosa Cutillo, Chief of Strategic Partnerships presso l'ONU Population Fund, se è
if she is online, I hope so, because I can't see her. We have technical problems. We can't keep the connection with Professor. Yes, yes, can hear you right now. Yes.
Okay, let's continue. So with projects around the world in 120 countries, we have been very efficient in identifying how well we do in terms of implementation of the SDGs. Next slide, please. The two reports that I'm gonna refer to are first, and of course, we have presence in many high-level fora trying to communicate our work with regards to measuring the performance of the SDGs and also accelerating their implementation with regards to system-based recommendations of investment plans, policy revisions that can facilitate real-world implementation. Next slide, please. Now, where we are, the two reports that we have, the UN report and the SDSN Sustainable Development Report, unfortunately show that only 17 to 18% of the SDGs are on track. This is unfortunate because it's very low. What do we have to do now? As the chair of the next Sustainable Development Report, the Global Sustainable Report of the UN, my line of thinking is that we have to insist, and we have to insist in the SDGs, maybe with slight revisions to include things about AI and about the crisis of the multilateral world and how we can restructure this multilateral world in order to enable implementation. But we have to insist because of two reasons. First, the SDGs is a brilliant framework of implementation that addresses all of our problems in the correct, holistic, and integrated way. Second, until today, there was no facility for implementation. There was no UN program for SDG implementation, like we have the environment program of the UN. We have not explicitly focused on implementation. Science has the solutions. Technology has a lot to offer in terms of solving difficulties with regards to implementing the SDGs. We even have the finance, if we can streamline it where it has to go, and I will come back to that. What we don't have, and we have the policy frameworks in most countries around the world. What we don't have is an explicit mechanism that will streamline all the science, the technology development, the finance, and capacity building from all the relevant stakeholders in order to start implementing. Now I'm going to go through the 3 steps that are needed for implementation. The first one is to be able to measure where you are and continuous monitor and assess where you are. Next slide, please, Angelica. And this is what the 2 reports that I mentioned before do, the UN report and the UN Sustainable Development Reports have done and have been doing since the launch of the 2015. And as I said before, only 17 to 18% of the SDGs are on track. Next slide, please. And we can see that next slide, please. And we can see that all our ecosystems are not in a good shape. When you see red, it means that you have below 50% implementation of the SDG. Our food systems are red, our water systems are red, our land systems are red, our marine systems are red, and it's not only globally, it's also in Europe. It's slightly better, the situation in Europe. Obviously, we have a leadership in terms of implementation, but it's not that good either. It's not that good either. And we have an excellent policy framework, and we have fiscal space, and we have blended finance because there is a lot of private money looking for interested investments. And we have some capacity, not enough though. I'm going to come back to that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Next slide. Next slide. Next. So, it is important that although we have this policy framework that is quite rich in Europe with the European Green Deal, it is important to translate that into implementable pathways. Countries, I have traveled in more than 120 countries across the globe. It is what governments are looking for is a very explicit, detailed explanation of the optimal structure, of the optimal mixture of policies, technologies, investments, fiscal and financial instruments to implement the SDGs, to implement the transposition of the SDGs in the myriads of laws and regulations that have been introduced in order to transpose the SDGs into national and regional framework. This is what Europe translated the SDGs into, the European Green Deal, 150 laws and regulations. Next slide, please. And of course, it's not easy. That's why the Global Climate Hub is working exactly on that, with mathematical structures that integrate all the sectors of the economy, the climate scenario downscaling, the energy sector, the transport sector, the agriculture sector, the land use sector and forestry sector, the marine use sector, and then integrating all of these dynamic pathways from today, every year, what you need to do in each and every sector and how you finance this. We integrate the dynamic pathways of the changes in each sector into socioeconomic pathways. And we show what needs to be done in terms of investment, in terms of policy revision, in terms of financing each and every year in each and every country of Europe. And we get continuous consultation and co-design by all relevant stakeholders. Next slide, please. And we make available, next slide, and we make available all of the results in an open access platform that collects all the data, all the models, and give you the results in dashboards, in digital twins, and so on. It is important to have this guidance. Next slide, please, and I will try to finish very quickly. Here you can find all of our reports. There is a report for each and every country, and there is a report that connects all the countries between them in order to showcase how trade will be affected and how the energy corridors should be constructed in order to trade even clean energy in the most efficient, cost-efficient cost-efficient way in Europe. Next slide, please. And of course, the thing that I want to communicate is now that we are in partnership with UNFPA. The structure of the Global Climate Hub of UNSDSN will be used as the science-based instrument of UNFPA and the NDC's refinement of the UNFPA. And what is important to know is that we are not just working in Europe. We are now working in the Global South with deep dive case studies that allow us to give very detailed recommendation. And the final step, once you have these deep dives and you have, I'm finishing, and when you have these dives and you have everything well, next slide please, very well informed, and you know exactly what you are doing each year at each sector of the economy, and you know where you get your financing, next slide please, and in order to identify financing, you have to have correct pricing of all the resources you are using, including natural resources. And we have a platform that allows you to do so. Next slide, please. And we also have a platform that allows you not only to say where the financing is coming from, but also create packages of measures that allow you to protect the vulnerable, those that cannot pay the transition to clean and digital economy. Next slide, please. If you are in the Global South, then it is a matter of restructuring your ratings in terms of country risk, de-risking the projects, and being able to provide long-run loans with low interest rates and use the instruments that the UN Conference for Sustainable Financing Sustainable Development came with in its recommendations. It can be done. Next slide, please. And finally, are forced to implement the exact pathways that you have designed and get the finance from the flows that you have identified. Next slide, please. Unfortunately, let me tell you that even in Europe, 85% of the skills that we need and occupations we need in order to implement the European Green Deal are missing from our labor market. The European labor market. The situation in the global south is even worse. 95% of the skills are missing. So how on earth are we going to implement all this complicated, holistic, huge transformation unless we get serious and really invest in capacity building, in education, in knowledge, in skills that are relevant for this transition? We have developed an AI tool that allows you to identify the skills that you need to implement any law or regulation or combinations of those, and then look in your labor force, see how much of this you have, and then connect for what you don't have with courses, open access courses that can upskill and reskill your labor market. So next slide. So in closely, I'm saying we need three things. We need to stay with the SDG, slightly revised, because now they are part of policy frameworks. Now people are familiar with it, all the stakeholders are familiar. We need to be serious about designing an implementation mechanism at UN level, and if UN is in crisis, then at regional level, with explicit recommendations, detailed recommendations for implementation, and detailed financing flows. And finally, we need to invest in capacity in our labor market. We need to have the skills to implement what we have as solutions and what we can finance by de-risking projects and attracting blended finance. Thank you for your patience.
Grazie professoressa, e appunto ha delineato un quadro degli.
Thank you. Thank you for the definition of the current framework concerning the objectives. One reason being that we need to know a number of resources to implement these SDGs. I'll give the floor to the Italian agency responsible for the put in practice the Agency 2030 objectives with the funds that are allocated, and funds that, according to many NGOs, seem to be dwindling. So the floor to our professor. Yes, thank you very much. I'd like to greet you all. I'd like to thank the Italian Agency for Cooperation and Development. I'm here in the field in New York. I'm glad to tell you about the perspective that I have from the technical viewpoint. Now, a brief comment. It's 10 years, it's a 10-year anniversary, Agency 2030, but in Italy, the law that the Parliament did pass introduced and anticipated a number of concepts that then became part of the Agency 2030. So major interconnection between the various aspects, because the starting point is the removal of the concept of the silos. We started with Agenda 2030 with different sectors, not connected to one another, but the objective, this doesn't work as a times of a kind of approach. We need a 360-degree type of approach, because achieving one objective helps us achieve other goals and milestones and targets. So there has to be a different kind of approach. This is very important. It was a major revolution in the Agenda 2030 that in fact also changed the way that objectives were perceived. So talking about resources, it might be provocative of my part, but very often the resources are there. What we need are good projects. So let's start with Italy. with the NGOs, when we talk with NGOs on a daily basis, I know that unlike other countries, in Italy, the current budget law envisaged a number of cuts, but Italy has also provided major support, still relatively low vis-à-vis other countries, but always there. The agency in Italy opened up 2 new offices in Africa, because talk about cooperation, you don't have to stay in Italy, you have to work together with the partner countries. So when you talk about resources, we have also to consider the countries that need these resources. So some countries have a problem. They don't know if they have to use these resources for objectives such as education, health, etc., or to repay their debt, or maybe how to work on a moratorium in order maybe to completely remove the debt. And this applies to a number of African countries and a number of other middle income kind of level countries and their debt towards Italy. So these funds maybe could be reused to promote sustainable development countries in those very same countries that otherwise would be penalized if they were to pay back their debt. So resources seem to be there, maybe they're not enough, but what we actually need is a series of good and feasible projects. So the Agenda 2030 has in fact acted as a stimulus for us. The projects are there, but if we want to build a school in one of our partner countries, we don't just build the schools because we want to have classrooms and students and teachers for that area, for that country, but we have to think of the results achieved in the medium to long term. The students, the pupils that will go to that school will take advantage of that school, but we have to make sure that the dropout level is low. We have to make sure that these students will become valuable resources in the future. The concept of ownership, in fact, is essential. It is a basic concept of the Mattei plan. So Italy comes up with plans and projects, but we don't want to impose them. We have plans and strategies that we want to propose. We want to support these countries, and with their own ownership, with their own policies, these countries, focusing their own priorities, have to work with us, and we are there as a partner.
È stata licenziata.
So at the beginning, no one envisaged anything about the energy crisis, COVID, and many other crises where the Agenda 2030 was, in fact, devised. We know now that we have to be flexible. We have to be ready to adapt to the contingent situation without losing sight of the final objective. We have to be able to adapt and adjust. How can we highlight the importance of Agenda 2030? Well, first of all, we have to focus on different partnerships. As the ambassador said, rightly said, on our own, we go nowhere. The Italian cooperation is working with many different partners. We believe in a multilateral approach with different actors from the civil society, from the private and public sector, from the academia world, with the cooperation of NGOs. The approach is based on a full partnership, on a full participation, so that every single actor can give the contribution for the achievement of the objectives. The Pact for the Future has in fact stated the importance of all this. It's important to coordinate all this. Sometimes all too often we work without coordinating what we do with other actors. You know, the agency with sister agencies in other European countries should work together in a non-competitive way. We should coordinate all of our efforts to have a better impact, so that our actions have a better impact. As for the 5 Ps, I believe that there's one P in particular that we should focus on in a special way, i.e. P for person. In the broadest sense of word, in all categories, in all fields, with a special focus on the talent cooperation, focusing on the women, on the young, on the disabled, most vulnerable categories that are still kept aside. And I believe we can do a lot with the right instruments. That the P for person, this letter P for person, must be a way for us to make sure that the world population become the leading actor of a sustainable future, focusing on education, health, global health, topics that are very close to the person. This is part and parcel of our own national constitution and could be a good model for our partners. So health is not just a subjective interest, it's a global interest. Not to mention the involvement of the private sector in many northern countries and southern countries as well. Last but not least, the agency is working to reinforce the awareness at a national level with the national citizenship program, so that we talk to schools, we work with schools, with the different agencies, with different partners, so that the objective of Agenda 2030 become more and more widely known everywhere at all levels.
Che sta perseguendo adesso il governo italiano.
Thank you very much for your comments. It is true that Italy has kept paying fees for the agenda, although this is criticized by many NGOs, and it is also true that all SDGs are that can only be achieved together. One SDG drives other SDGs and acts as a driving force. So this is why it's important to now listen to Mariarosa Cutillo from the UN. Professor Cutillo, thank you and welcome.
Much, Maria, and thanks to everyone for inviting us. Unfortunately, our executive director, Diana Keita, had to leave, but I am delighted to represent her. I am Mariarosa Cutillo. Buongiorno. I am the head of the private sector and civil society office here at UNFPA's headquarters. So I will convey the message that Diana wanted to convey to this very important meeting today. Of course, confirming our full engagement, full passion for the Sustainable Development Goals, and particularly under the perspective of the United Nations Population Fund. So I will read our message and I'll try to put some color in it. So good afternoon, good evening, good morning, Your Excellency Maurizio Massari, Permanent Representative of Italy to the United Nations, esteemed representatives of national and international organizations, partners and friends, signore e signori. I'm honored to join you today to reflect on 10 years of the 2030 Agenda, inspired by the important report Una Governance Anticipante per l'Italia, presented to us by the Ecosistema Futuro and the Italian Alliance for Sustainable Development. I am grateful to the organizers for convening us around a theme that matters not only for Italy, but for every country striving to secure a more just and sustainable future. Italy's leadership in exploring anticipatory governance is a source of hope for others, demonstrating that we can prepare for tomorrow by acting with intention today. This report is more than an analysis, it is a call to action. It reminds us that in a world marked by climate change, technological disruption, demographic shifts, and rising inequalities, we must move beyond short-term responses and build institutions with foresight. Abbiamo voluto sottolineare appunto nel discorso di Diana Keita.
We wanted to underline the vision that we have of this report. It looks at the future in a different way. And let me say that what was said before about the validity of the SDGs remains. It's a polar star. Questa visione
that every pregnancy is wanted, every childbirth is safe, and every young person's potential is fulfilled. This is not simply a slogan, it is the essence of sustainable development. As a population and public health agency, our work is inherently about anticipating future trends and risks. Yet it is also important to take stock of the past. As we look back on the last 10 years of the 2030 Agenda, we see both achievements and setbacks. Global poverty has declined and millions more people enjoy access to healthcare and education. Fewer girls are marrying as children and fewer are giving birth before adulthood. Millions have been able to pursue education, work, and leadership positions because of our collective action. We should all recognize this progress. Yet the gains made have been uneven, and emerging threats and depending inequalities have set us back. Today, we are woefully off track in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals, and that's a fact. The landmark program of action of the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development, the one that we call the ICPD program of action, which guides UNFPA's work, is critical to getting us back on track. It places human dignity and rights and choices at the heart of sustainable development. Sexual and reproductive health and rights remain the cornerstone of our shared future. These rights are not optional, they are fundamental to human dignity, equality, and well-being, as affirmed earlier this week during the high-level meeting on Beijing +30. Quindi vogliamo ribadire la centralità dei diritti sessuali e riproduttivi come un grande enabler dei Sustainable Development Goals. The sexual and reproductive rights enable women to pursue education and work, strengthens economy, and fosters healthier societies. As some countries explore policies to address demographic shifts, our solutions must expand rights, not restrict them. History has shown us that policies aimed at controlling fertility rates, whether to increase or decrease them, often do so at the expense of individual choice and human rights. Instead, our focus must remain on empowering every person, especially women and girls, to make informed decisions about their own bodies and futures. This is essential to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As we look to the future beyond 2030, sexual and reproductive rights remain non-negotiable. A central pillar of human rights, equality, and an accelerator of progress towards all Sustainable Development Goals for generations to come. With the global pushback on women's rights jeopardizing the very foundation of gender equality and human dignity, this is not a moment to compromise. Looking to the future, anticipating and solving deeply interconnected challenges requires a renewed commitment to multilateralism. and the rebuilding of trust between nations, between institutions and citizens, and across generations. Last year, the world took a historic step forward with the UN Pact for the Future, together with the Declaration on Future Generations and the Global Digital Compact. These commitments align closely with UNFPA's role in providing data, foresight, and demographic analysis that help governments design future-proof policies, whether to manage demographic shifts, including aging populations, or the opportunities of the largest ever youth generation. Without investing in young people, now 1.9 billion strong, we cannot unlock the leadership and creativity excuse me, countries need to build for resilient and peaceful societies. The report's call to strengthen Italy's foresight capacity echoes what we at UNFPA have understood for decades. Policies cannot work in silos. Dobbiamo avere un approccio olistico, un approccio di inclusive multilateralism. For example, policies must be tailored to distinct demographic groups and encompass projected needs in education, health, housing, and labor. They must also consider gender and other inequalities, assuring that no one is left behind. We need integrated approaches that reflect the interconnectedness of today's challenges with new megatrends. For decades, UNFPA has proudly partnered with governments to provide the data and evidence needed for future-proof policymaking. UNFPA's work on population dynamics and demographic foresight provides governments with a critical lens to understand the needs of a changing society. Without accurate population data, we can't measure progress or plan wisely. By offering reliable data and evidence, we equip countries with the insights they need to design their own right-based policies. These are policies that can protect social systems, foster economic growth, and ensure universal access to healthcare. Only then can countries harness the potential of population change. UNFPA stands ready to support Italy's journey by equipping governments with the data to move from reactive to anticipatory decision-making, by ensuring that sexual and reproductive rights are for all, and by empowering young people and women, we can shape a future of health, equity, and resilience. And as we look ahead, let us remember the choices we make today are the inheritance of tomorrow. Mentre guardiamo il futuro, ricordiamoci che le scelte che facciamo oggi sono every generation, present and future, has the opportunity to realize its full potential. Thank you very much. Grazie molte per questo invito, è stato un piacere.
Thank you very much for your invitation. It was a pleasure, and I wish that you have a successful event. Now, I would like to start the message that was sent by the Minister for Foreign Affairs, Edmondo, and International Cooperation, Edmondo Cirielli. Good morning. Welcome to the 10th anniversary of the 2030 Agenda. I thank ASviS for their commitment and ability to keep the public debate alive on this topic, together with those who have worked for this appointment. 2030 is behind the corner, but due to the instability of the geopolitical picture, we still have many question marks. Energy, innovation, infrastructure. These SDGs are characterized by a positive trajectory. 18% of SDGs are going back, whereas most SDGs are stagnant or going very slowly. gender equality, fighting against poverty, hunger, access to education, and dignified job. These are priority sectors for Italian cooperation because they express our national excellence. We focus more on them. We use water, hygiene, food chain, education, vocational training. We focus on these activities. To us, this also means to invest in other sustainable initiatives. Yesterday, I had the honor to inaugurate the refunding campaign. The campaign was chaired by Italy with Angelia in Africa. And speaking of Africa, I'd like to end my intervention. The greatest challenge is inequalities. Even the 2030 SDGs that are progressing are inconsistent. Africa is the youngest continent and with the greatest potential, but it's always left behind when it comes to the achievement of objectives. The Italian plan is a model for Africa, and as part of this trajectory, think that with African partners this year, we are publishing, we are investing millions in cooperation. We're also working on the fourth objective of the agenda by giving space to innovative finance and encouraging the issue of debt and the way to address it. The world needs people with you. Thank you very much, and I hope you can continue your proceedings successfully.
Del Vice Ministro Cirielli. Io prima di chiudere questo.
This was a message by Minister Cirielli. Now the floor back to Professor Giovannini. So many interesting interventions and presentations. And they all highlight that the agenda, the UN, similar messages. We listened to President Trump that was attacking the UN itself. Multilateralism is under discussion, questioned over the last decades. That is the only way to dialogue, have an international dialogue, everyone on the same ground to get rid of conflict, whereas now we're seeing an increased conflict rate through wars in some regions, Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan. Conflicts are more than 50. Without multilateralism, such conflicts may escalate. It's a risky situation. So, what do we expect of this new year at the UN?
Morto. Oh.
Now, I do not believe that multilateralism is dead, brain dead, as said. I believe that we may keep a certain balance, acknowledging that at different levels, for instance, from the viewpoint of peacekeeping, the UN is facing a very difficult situation. The UN are not able to come up with a solution because some members of the Security Council, the most important ones, by the way, and 2 out of them have veto power, chose either to attack other countries, as our President Meloni yesterday said, thus violating ethical and legal standards that the UN as such is based on, or they decided to focus on the bilateral participation, that they no longer take part in summits such as the Sevilla one on international finance, and clearly say that the Agenda 2030 is no longer part of their own future. So any organization, be it an enterprise, for instance, whenever 2 of the 2 members of the board of directors or 2 of the majority stakeholders decide to withdraw their stake, well, that enterprise would plummet into a serious crisis. So it's a serious, seriously dangerous kind of attitude. Let's think of China. That think of China and other countries. For instance, a few months ago, I was taking part in a Boal Forum, a kind of a Eastern Davos summit, and I listened the Chinese Prime Minister mentioning the Pact for the Future, Agenda 2030. When he mentioned Agenda 2030, and when Agenda 2030 was mentioned in the Shanghai meeting of the BRICS companies, so it was amazing. It was amazing. I'm not saying that they are so sincere. Maybe they are just words, but this viewpoint, you know, that there's part of the world that wants to conquer the world from a multilateral viewpoint, but they want to conquer power. They want to have power. Let's not forget that the UN is not just Security Council. Does not just consist of the Security Council. We think the World Health Organization, UNESCO, and not to mention other major UN agencies. So taking aim at the multilateralism does not just entail an attack to the Security Council. This is where Europe as such must play a stronger card, and we must be united. And considering recent declarations on the part of some European countries seem to be worrying, and they seem to be the same kind of things, but it's dramatic. It's seriously worrying that Europe takes part in Co-op 30 meeting without a united front, because there are countries such as Italy there are countries that are questioning the 2040 objectives, mentioning possible damages that these said objectives might cause to the enterprises, etc. Ambassador Massari rightly mentioned a very important issue, i.e., he mentioned the risk that we incur when we use words that have been turned into ideologies. He talked about the stabilization of the planet. Stabilization, how to stabilize the planet. We are destabilized. This is a destabilized, unstable world, and focusing on common policies in a world that's so devoid of balance. This means that each single country will find it difficult to achieve the objective. So if we feel destabilized, maybe we should focus more on communication. We want to stabilize the country, our country and the planet. So we focus on communication, and these words are important. And this is what I personally feel is very important, one of the lessons that I will take with me after our debate today. So here we have a very short break. This is the end of the first part of our debate, and we are about to start the second part of our debate, when we will tackle more specific issues that will help us understand how real these aspects are, or how close they are to our own world. Thank you.
Ho capito, pensavo ci fosse, come dire, un intervento.
Okay, no, as it were, I'll give the floor to Lombardi. Works for the campus, the Polytechnical in Turin, worked for the academic network for 2030. She has acted as president of the network of academia. So you have, yes, thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. I hope you can hear me all right. It's an honor for me to be part as a co-chair of the Sustainable Development Solution Network, the Italian chapter of this network, of this international network that, as Mr. Giovannini rightly said in his introduction, was set up back in 2012, and that has raised worldwide awareness about problems that we have to tackle and solutions, and so that the science world, the academic world, have closed the gap between them and the world of enterprises. The idea of the Italian chapter is to make Agenda 2030 closer and closer to the citizens. In fact, all along our difficulties in the implementation of Agenda 2030, I can tell you that, in fact, Agenda 2030 has created a common language. We in the academic world have a common language pertaining the different objectives, the different indicators. We speak the same language now. We understand each other, also in terms of measurement. I'm not just talking about the academic world. Many different actors now communicate with one another, and in fact, our citizens are closer to the policies. They understand more about our policies. Many policies are easier to understand, translate, thanks to Agenda 2030, that in fact provides important indicators, important for the measurements for the implementation of the objectives. We've had a local review for our green communities, so we're talking about small villages, small places, small communities. Now, we have an important heritage that is there. We are proud of our contribution. We are proud of what we have been doing. As my colleague Michel Pezzagno said, and she's in charge of an important document center on these issues. It all started back in 2016, and from the viewpoint of the Polytechnic in Turin, from my personal viewpoint, I can tell you that, well, ours, of course, is a viewpoint of a university, of the world of university. 10 years have elapsed, and over these 10 years, a number of actions have been carried out, actions concerning the impacts a major effort has been made by the Italian university world, together with the civil society, together with the world of enterprises. We've worked together to change pace, to focus greater attention to the culture of the impact, of the effects, of the results that our actions have in practice, with particular reference to the research, the innovation, the testing, the use of our university campuses as labs to carry out tests that can then be replicated in various environments at a national level. So within this Sustainable Development Solution Network, we've worked a lot in the area of climate change, and we are working together. And we want to exploit this opportunity that we have to work together. Based on our national academic tradition, we've been supported by many European policies. So that we've been able to enhance the value of the knowledge. Thanks to the recommendations of the EU Council in 2023, or the agreement for the on the research world, on the actions focusing on the research activities carried out within the various universities. Starting from 2019, the EU has started to assess the academic action, taking all these issues into account. That is what will enable us to implement the objectives of Agenda 2030 with the cooperation of all the actors, all agencies, all subjects that give a fundamental contribution to go ahead with that acceleration that we really need. And let me conclude by briefly mentioning something that we attach major importance to, i.e. the issue of education. In particular, the coordinator of the Sustainable Development Solution Network focused on the issue of education and the issue of skills, capacities, and competencies. If we want to talk about Italy in particular, and the acceleration that we must ensure so that we look at the future, at a sustainable development. So if we want all this, I think we should wage on education, focus on education, not just in terms of competencies, but also in the sense of education in the future, on what we have to expect for our future. In Italy, very often we need green skills, green competencies. This means that we need to have within our educational system a greater attention focused on the organization of cross-disciplinary courses, training courses for our students in order to also anticipate the needs of the market. The education that we have must become a training opportunity based on a different way of thinking, different way of carrying out the education action. It has to be an interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary kind of approach, not so much linked to specific behaviors, specific sectors that are separated one from the other. When we talk about competencies and skills, we talk about growth, the possibility to become richer in the broader sense of the word. So without these competencies, we find it difficult to implement this common commitment that we have for the sake of our own future. So I would like to state again that Italy seems to be ranking last, also in terms of number of people completing their university path. All in all, in Europe, we rank in the European countries rank around 30% of the population completing their university, achieving a university degree. In Italy, we are around less than 10% or around about 10%. So we should invest more, make greater investments in the vocational training as well, supporting the development of our own communities. Let me conclude with a sentence that I really like, because it goes back to fight for human rights that was fought by African Americans. As Malcolm X rightly said, the education is a passport for the future, because the future belongs to all those that are working on it today. So I believe that ASviS's engagement and commitment in this sense, with the proposal of a governance that can work in advance to create this ecosystem for the future, going back to the Pact for the Future. Well, I think that in all this, we are in agreement. Thank you very much, Professor. This is one of the most important aspects. Education, as you rightly said, mentioning Malcolm X's words that seem so far away from what the current president of the United States say, but they tell us once again how important it is to work on education. In Italy, we are, as you rightly said, lagging a bit behind, alas. So I'd like to hear now Mr. Filippo Bettini and the viewpoint of the Italian enterprises working on and with Agenda 2030 and that are working on the future of our country. We're talking about companies in the private sector. Thank you.
Anzitutto siamo felici di essere qui oggi insieme alla...
We're glad to be here. I'm glad to be here together with the permanent representative to the United Nations, together with all of us here, all focused on Agenda 2030 for sustainable development. I've been dealing with these issues for years now. I work for the Italian agency, and today I'm here representing also Global Competent Network Italy, i.e. a world organization advocated by Mr. Kofi Annan back when we shifted from the 20th to 21st century, that groups together over 20,000 companies and enterprises worldwide and focuses on objectives that are in fact the same ones as the Agenda 2030 objectives. And as for Agenda 2030, I'd like to restate the importance of these objectives. There cannot be questions. 10 years ago, I gave my contribution to the definition of the Agenda 2030 objectives. There was the involvement of governments, citizens, communities, and private sector was ready to be involved. 5 years, there's another 5 years to go before we achieve the date, the deadline, and there are so many shadows along our path. So I said over 20,000 enterprises worldwide in Italy, Global Compact Network groups together over 700 companies, and the number is in fact growing year on year, which is satisfying and reassuring. So we believe there are two important enabling factors for us to help us achieve the objectives. On one hand, rules and regulations produced by the various governments and regulatory bodies that can accelerate processes, and on the other hand, the contributions given by the enterprises, i.e. technology and innovation that must increase, that can accompany the achievement of the objectives, and innovation in a sense that could be, however, not as regular. It could be an irregular kind of innovation, as we've seen over the past few years. You know, we've achieved, we're here with the AI without actually being able to manage it as we ought to. In Europe, of course, over the past few years, we've suffered from a difficulty in the transposition of fundamental regulations such as the reporting mechanism, for instance, or the due diligence all along the supply chain. We have general principles that we agree with, but Europe has come up with a very complex implementation mechanism that has entailed a number of risks, whereby the risk of companies that are not able to follow the same procedure when implementing this mechanism, whereby in other countries they have extra European matrices and they follow a more homogeneous kind of mechanisms. And so there's this lack of uniformity. So the first issue is the relationship with the regulators, European regulators, concerning the implementation of this very same regulation. We know it's a valid and very useful regulation, but maybe there could be a better dialogue with the world of enterprises, together with the community of practitioners that the Global Compact in fact represents. Because further to the commitment of the CEOs sitting in the various boards, we have a series of competencies of the various chief sustainability officers, the chief financial officers, the chief procurement officers that are responsible for the platforms ensuring the implementation, the sustainability. And that was the first issue.
Come è stato in passato,
and all this is not just an issue of co-compliance, and this goes back to a debate that we had some time ago, the famous just transition towards new models, etc. Hoping that the overall competitive challenge of the sustainable development might in fact entail the opportunities and the business cases beyond sustainability, and how this can give the competitive edge to many companies, and this is what many companies make reference to. Thank you.
Il risultato aggiornato di uno studio che
a survey was conducted by Global Compact worldwide. We have we interview CEOs, 2,000 of them are interviewed every year, and the latest findings tell us that 90% of CEOs recommend to keep investing in sustainability initiatives. 88% believe that sustainability is more important than 5 years ago, and 90% intend to stick to their commitments. So quite comforting. However, only half respondents feel easy at publicly informing about their progress. So public statements on sustainability are being slowed down due to the growing public scrutiny. I'm in New York right now for the General Assembly meetings, and I have to say that especially in the American business community, I see that they are more silent. In the past, the US wasn't pioneering in this field, but now they seem to be more silent. silent. Another sign comes from the acceleration shown by Asian corporates in recent years in terms of various initiatives concerning their commitment to reduce CO2 emissions. So some indicators tell us that in some regions they see a business case behind sustainability. So they believe that these initiatives can be rewarding for all stakeholders. In 2015, when the agenda was launched and introduced, the director of the Global Compact was Georg Kelle, the first executive director of Global Compact, a German engineer. He always talked about the community of citizens when it comes to sustainability and the role played by citizens, that citizens would play in the future. He used to say, they are sleeping giant. As soon as citizens wake up, this will be disruptive. In Europe, this year, we have involved 16 European countries, including the UK, and we interviewed the citizens again. Results are pretty clear. 80% of European citizens believe that sustainable development should be a priority for governments. 85% think that sustainability regulations are crucial to grow more sustainably, even though this half of these people hope that the legislation is not too cumbersome for SMEs. 70% of Europeans think that sustainability is a driving force for competitiveness and believe that more resources should be employed for fulfilling and achieving SDGs. So my feeling is that we have to consider these indications, these signals that come from consumers, from civil society. Their demands should be listened to. I'm not going to repeat what has already been said about surveys. Multilateralism should become more effective, whatever the situation. So companies can certainly play a central role. And I think that Network Italia and the Global Compact worldwide reaffirm the serious commitment taken by companies with respect to such goals. Thank you, Filippo Bettini. And now the floor to Carola Carazzone, lawyer, to discuss SDG number 10 about inequalities. Carola Carazzone is Secretary General of her organization. She's a lawyer and an expert on human rights. She is also Vice President of Philanthropy Europe Association.
Grazie mille per l'invito, grazie.
Thank you. Thank ASviS for the huge and outstanding work they have been doing over the years. What about philanthropy? from the Italian and the European standpoint, philanthropy can do a lot of things. So although it has been attacked in the last couple of weeks, and I don't see why. Ford Foundation, George Alex Soros, and others have done wonderful things. And I believe that the 2030 agenda and the role that philanthropy is playing are very, very important. Philanthropy is doing a lot for the agenda. Philanthropy doesn't make up for public policy or deficit. Philanthropy, in its best expression, can play a role as a driving force. It can innovate, make long-term investments, go beyond projects. Philanthropy works by enabling processes, which is key to understand the complexity of our world. In the last 10 years, we have been committed to the agenda together with ASviS. The different dimensions are all interconnected. For example, we now have 900 community foundations across Europe, which systematically adopted an owner for organization approach, meaning that the agenda, the 2030 agenda, is embedded in all of their activities, operations of foundations, accounting, and much more, so that the agenda is an integral and cross-cutting part of the entire philanthropic organization. Anticipatory governance, we firmly believe in its value. This paper is is brand new. We launched an initiative 2 years ago called Future Chair. The two meanings of the word chair, president and actual chair. We invited all to enable the participation of young people in decision-making processes and leave an empty chair in panel meetings or government meetings to represent the future generations. It's a beautiful initiative and has been accepted by 61 Italian philanthropic organizations. It is now becoming popular in Europe. You can find everything in our websites. So starting from 2016, from the Addis Ababa summit, it has become clear that philanthropy and foundations can play a unique and distinctive role. They are immensely free to move around. At the same time, they have this huge responsibility. They think not in terms of blame, avoidance, as many policymakers do. They don't use KPI or profit-based criteria. They think in terms of relations, of long-term investments, and gentle, empathetic capital to help people and organizations who are striking to find solutions for the 2030 agenda. On a personal note, I also believe in the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals initiative. Each and every one of us can be actors and agents for change. Never before so many people have, felt so anxious. We don't know what to do, where to go. I think that this dimension of the 2030 agenda, the IDGs, I mean, is an outstanding initiative. Thank you. Pierluigi Stefanini, so many points and comments have been raised. Strengths and weaknesses have been highlighted. There is still 5 years to 2030. Not much. We just learned that Russian aircraft flew over Alaska, and Trump told NATO, you can take them down, please. Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank Enrico Giovannini. Thank you for leading us through this journey. I thank all attendees. This meeting helps us, as Giovannini said, we are stubborn, but we're not silly. We believe that the values of peace, democracy, freedom, and democratic participation of citizens inspire us. So we're not surrendering, we're not giving in, given the current context, so difficult and threatening. We have to respond, we have to commit ourselves, we need to keep doing what the Alliance, what the ASviS has been doing in the last 10 years. The future ecosystem with 5 proposals. Proposals that can be forward and implemented. We are far-sighted. We look at those who will come after us. Sometimes this is not so easy to see, but we have to do more for the future. In whatever we do, we should always try and plan for the future, even in our daily chores. We have to be far-sighted to better understand where we want to go. What effects will develop in the future? as stressed 1 year ago at the UN Assembly, it takes more commitment on the part of governments, including ours. So we should now show more resolve to shape the future. As underlined several times by Guterres, sustainable development, peace and security and human rights are strongly interconnected. So it is our duty to counter, to disarm the planet, to keep such dimensions linked with one another. Laudato Si by Pope Francis was published 10 years ago. He contributed to the 2030 agenda with his vision of integral ecology, an essential search for an ecological conversion that he highlighted, and we still need to find the actions to obey to that invitation, to that request. Professor Giovannini explained that we are going through a difficult time. Those who support the 2030 agenda sometimes exaggerate, they claim. They are too catastrophic. Their approach feeds anxiety, is pessimistic, or they are too pragmatic and realistic just for the sake of it, without seriously addressing the current issues. Let's take the Italian case. This morning, I read that in Italy we have 5.7 million people living in poverty in our country. It's hard to accept this figure. It's an unbearable phenomenon. Remember how many people died of heat waves. Not to mention the cost of energy. There must be a reason for that. As a country, we are not investing enough in renewable energy sources to curb costs, and also, you know, the precarious condition of young people. Well, we believe that all of these things have to be addressed, need to find, you know, a proper response, and the contents and goals of the agenda, given its objectives and the method adopted, can help do that. And finally, since we generally work as an alliance, don't forget that on the 22nd of October in Rome, in the parliamentary room of Group SDSN will present the 10th report on the Italian condition. We are used to present our analysis, to gather evidence, and at the same time we would like also to propose solutions and working methods to use energy and resources that are there, but sometimes are not properly exploited. This effort results from the many people who help us in this pluralistic participatory work. This is something we want to keep doing. It is a difficult situation, globally speaking, with major implications for Italy, but we have to react, we have to counter this tendency. Let's try and deploy responsibly with the right vision this sustainable development outlook for the future, especially for the generations that will come after us. Thank you.
Grazie al professor Stefanini.
Thank you, thank you. As a way of conclusion, let me remind you of a piece of information, i.e. 170,000 people have remotely linked to us during these 2 hours. So this is a good omen. I would like to thank you very much once again. I hope you will join in our October meeting. These meetings help us understand more about our country as well, help us start along a path towards better solution. Thank you very much and hope to see you soon. Goodbye.